Welcome to Success in Brief. I'm your host, Rosanne Felicello. In every episode, we spotlight successful women in the law. We discuss with them their journey to success. We talk about the difficulties and the trade-offs, along with the highlights and the benefits, and about what success means to each of them. We hope to inspire you with these stories on your own path to success.
Hello, my name is Rosanne Felicello, and this is Success in Brief. I'm thrilled today to welcome Melina Spadone. Melina is a senior counsel at Pillsbury, where she's a corporate attorney who advises ultra-high net worth individuals and family offices on myriad legal issues, including crisis management, litigation, and real estate. Melina was recently named by The Hollywood Reporter as one of Hollywood's top troubleshooters, and she recently settled the Alec Baldwin, I guess it's Rusted, correct me, that's the correct name, Melina, of the Rust Productions, wrongful death action in California. And in addition to her work at Pillsbury and her legal work, Melina also devotes substantial time to charitable ventures. She sits on the boards of Room to Grow and MICLAT. She also devotes She also devotes time to Met Opera National Council auditions. And importantly, she has co-produced the documentary Getting the Get, which goes inside private Orthodox Jewish enclaves in the US and follows trailblazing wives, mothers, advocates, and activists, challenging the millennia-old practice of get refusal that chains women to dead marriages and perpetuates domestic abuse. I'm excited to speak to Melina today about all of her work and her outside ventures and more about her story of success. Melina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Roseanne. Thanks for having me.
Let's jump right in. What was your path to becoming an attorney?
Sort of accidental, I would say. It wasn't something that I had intended to do. And when I finished college, I was looking for something to do. And my single mother was always having one problem or another with the dining room table or the delivery guy. And I thought that if I could write to them with a law degree after my name, they would be a little more responsive to helping her get what she was supposed to get in the first place.
That's good as incentive as any, right, to go to law school? I hear you. So you didn't have anyone in your family that had been a lawyer or anyone else that you saw to influence you in that direction?
No, my mom is a doctor and had gone to medical school after kid number 3 and before kid number 4. And she was always an inspiration to me. So I'm sort of the slacker because I only have 3 kids and she did it with 4, although she did it with the kids and I did it before the kids. So that was a little easier. And I've always been, as the oldest child, the caretaker in the family. And it seemed a natural fit that if you're going to be the one protecting, your siblings and your mom, that you have some actual legal experience and information in order to do it better.
That's amazing. Your mom sounds like a very strong woman and a great influence.
She definitely is, and she continues to be. She's still working, practicing
Oh my
medicine.
Goodness. Wow.
At 76.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So I saw that you went to undergrad in Brooklyn and law school in Fordham. Are you from New York City originally?
I was born in São Paulo, Brazil, but I spent the bulk of my life in New York. And even Brooklyn College was an accident. After high school, I said that I was not going to college at all. I'd had enough education. And my very wise mother, instead of saying, no, you have to go, she was like, okay, well, what's your plan? So I moved to New York with some friends from high school's sister who was moving out of some apartment and took a job in a medical practice, given my mom's background. After a couple months, I decided I needed to meet people my own age because it was a geriatric practice. And I thought I would just take, 1 or 2 classes at Brooklyn College, which was down the street from where I worked. 1 or 2 classes turned into rushing to finish 18 credits in my semester so that I could go to law school in, the September session versus having to wait a year if I graduated in January. So I went to Brooklyn College, and then Fordham was a natural sort of fit. It was a wonderful school that had a lot of support, even if it wasn't on my radar when I first started the process.
Well, that's a great story as to telling us to, finding that college was the right thing. I think some people go to college just because it's a natural progression out of high school and they get there and they don't know why they're there. So I think that's very interesting that your mom gave you sort of that leeway um, with her background. I'm wondering if I would have the fortitude to do the same with my own children. My oldest is 14, and I don't know. How do you feel about whether you would think you'd be able to give your kids that much leeway to tell them it's okay if they don't go right away to college?
Definitely not. I've told them that they have to go, that a sort of basic necessity and a minimum level of education. But I have told my kids that, school is not only about learning. There are a lot of life lessons and social lessons that they get out of the experience. And I think college is definitely suited for that, especially if you go away from home and you have to figure out things that you didn't have to do before and sort of navigate life. It's a good pre-grown up experience. And the learning is just a bonus. It's like you get the flexibility to focus on things that you're interested in or learn about things that you never knew you were interested in. But I think the main aspect of college, even for me, was about, growing up and coming of age.
Oh yeah, I mean, you definitely are not quite an adult when you leave high school at 18, right? So you need those extra years.
I'm still not an adult.
So we were just chatting a few minutes before we got on, and you were mentioning that Pillsbury wasn't where you started your legal career. So where did you go after Fordham?
So I went to Hughes Hubbard and Reed. That was my first legal job. But very quickly I went in-house. I think it was only in my second year. One of my clients was Viacom. I was working on a bunch of transactions for them and they asked me to come in-house. I had a wonderful mentor, Ken Lefkowitz, who said to me, you really should stay in law for 5 or 6 years before you go in-house. Make sure you have a solid foundation. He took me out to lunch and gave me this lovely life advice, which was probably accurate. And I said, it's Viacom. I'm definitely going. If they're calling, I'm answering. MTV was just getting, hugely popular. And as the auntie to my sister's kids, I was like, oh my gosh, I get to bring, Nickelodeon and MTV swag, and I was a rock star. So on the the what we call the shadow career, the rock star shadow career lawyer. So I went in house and then I went to business school after about 2.5 years at Viacom, mostly because in house was a shock. As a corporate lawyer, when you get financial statements, you take a folder and you write financial statements and you don't look at them and you don't understand them. You just know what they're called. And I was doing a lot of business stuff at Viacom, being in house. And on a particular transaction with some bankers, I was upset that I didn't know all of the lingo, and I never like to be in a situation where I don't, sort of feel like I'm doing my best. So I asked them if I could go to business school, and they had offered to send me to the executive MBA program at Harvard, which was a lovely offer. But given that I was working law firm hours, Viacom was a mini law firm in itself, 120 lawyers worldwide. I couldn't quite figure out how to either not screw up my MBA or not screw up my job. So I decided to take time off and I went to business school in France at INSEAD, which is a accelerated MBA program for professionals for 10 months. It sounded better to my boss than saying, I just want to drink coffee and eat croissant. I was like, oh, I'm getting an MBA. But it was a wonderful experience too. And I think what I've learned in my career is I had these traditional paths, the ones you described, like you go to high school and then you go to college, and there's a lot of box checking of the path. And I did a lot of things off the path and was sort of embarrassed by them because it was more about my own interest than my career. And I've discovered over the last 28 years of practicing law that the side things actually were much more enhancing for my actual career than I had first realized. So even INSEAD has been a huge aspect in my business development because I have friends all over the world now, connections. When someone says, do you know a lawyer in Madrid? I'm like, oh, let me ask on the group chat. So all of the side things have been very actually right on track.
That's a fascinating learning, I think, because I think it actually goes to, I try to teach that something similar to my kids all the time, right? In that embrace what makes you different, right? Embrace sort of the things that you really enjoy, even if you think it seems weird to others, because it's really these differences where you excel and where you become who you are. And I think it's similar in terms of, not always following the straight path, following your path, and it'll be enriching on many levels. So I think that's really fascinating. It's worked out for you that way. So you went to business school, and then did you go back in-house after that?
So after business school, I did go in-house. I had the fantasy that I was going to be living in Paris and working at L'Oreal, but instead I married an American and moved to Palo Alto. It was still a great experience because it was during the dot-com boom and he was running a tech startup. So I ended up recruiting about 8 classmates to come
Oh,
move
wow.
to Palo Alto, and they were from all over the world, from India, from Brazil, from the US, from Egypt, and help them get their work visas and do all of their stock option grants, even though I wasn't technically, planning to work at my former spouse's startup. But it was a great experience because I got to bring my friends, and that's sort of how I started my little community within Palo Alto, since I wasn't from there and didn't know anyone there. And then I started to go back to a law firm. I interviewed at Skadden during the days of the dot-com boom and was shocked to see people in Tivas and T-shirts in a law firm. But that was sort of the culture that they adopted during that time. I had closed-toed shoes. I looked totally out of place. But then my former spouse's startup ended up relocating him back to New York. So I skipped over Skadden and went in-house to the International Council of Shopping Centers, which is a trade association for the retail real estate shopping industry. I like the idea of shopping. It sounded fabulous. I have to say there was much less shopping required than I had hoped as the GC, but it was a wonderful experience because I took over from their general counsel who'd been there for decades. He was in his 70s. And apropos of doing things on the side, I think I got the job because he and I ended up talking about opera. I think that at a certain level, they had plenty of resumes from wonderful headhunters, with all of the credentials that you possibly could have. And the only thing that was a differentiator is he and I spent extra time talking about the ring cycle because he would explain he'd take off work the next day so that he could get enough sleep after staying up late for the opera. And then the CEO at the time saw that I spoke Italian, which was one of the requirements for the business school I went to have 2 languages in addition to English, and immediately walked in the interview and started talking to me in Italian. Luckily, I still had the facility to do it since I had just finished school right before that. Otherwise, I'd be hard pressed to conduct an interview. And those 2 things, I think, really got me the job versus my resume, which is sort of at this point assumed, that you have certain experience and skills.
It's all about the personal connections, right? So that's, and you can't have a lot of personal connections if you don't have interest. I think that's the one thing that, young associates kind of forget sometimes, or they're not allowed to if they're spending 100 hours a week at work. You can't really develop interests and be interesting to other people sometimes.
You hang out in the cafeteria in those days and meet other people who have interest to see what piques your own curiosity and get them to invite you to the, museum, yes, something, or the film festival.
Yeah, I just remember as a young associate, I started off in Big Law too, and just very little time to actually enjoy, the museums or do any of the fun things that you need to do to become sort of a well-rounded person. And so I remember at one point thinking, oh God, I have no I have no actual things that I can talk about that are interesting because all I do is work. So
well, I was in the same position until I came back from Palo Alto, and I was committed to myself to do exactly what you just described. So I forced myself to buy an associate opera package so that I knew in advance what day I had to go, and it would be sort of a commitment on my calendar versus, oh, I hope I have time one day to go to the opera. And I often left at intermission because I was exhausted, but I figured when I was older, like in my 80s, I could show up at intermission and just stay for the end because I'd seen the first half of all the operas. But if you treat it like that versus an obligation, And, if you're tired, you leave, and don't be late though, they won't let you in. And I did the same thing for museums. So you can do it in a limited way. Even when I was in law school, I rollerbladed across the park from Fordham to the Upper East Side to take classes, so that I could study French, just because it was something I was interested in. So I would go to Alliance Française. I don't remember when I did it. Maybe it was a weekend, but I just managed to fit it in somehow.
Yeah, it's important to always find time to do something that makes your heart sing a little bit, right? Okay, so you've had all these fantastic experiences. You're still not yet at Pillsbury. So what happens after the shopping, the ICR, right?
ICSC.
ICSC, sorry.
It's okay. I can't do acronyms.
ICSC.
Even when I do USA, I have to think exactly what that stands for. And then I end up being in all these situations where everything is an acronym. Even when I had to study for the California bar and they like give you the mnemonics, I'm like, no, it's not for me. So after the ICSC, I went in-house to my first official family office, in the sense that I'd been around family offices for years without recognizing them for what they were. Even at ICSC, most of the major retail REITs were family offices. They were named for the founder, the successor was the son. So I'd already been exposed to the sort of extra layer of family business on top of a business that's, either listed on an exchange or a big business. So I went to my first family office, and I was there until they decided to take outside money, and they needed a compliance lawyer, which I was not, nor did I want to become one. I told them they shouldn't do it. And years later, I ran into the CEO and found out they were undoing it. So, well, from there again to another family office with a stint in between headhunting while I had my third child. And during that year, again, I made the most of the fact that I wasn't a corporate associate working all those hours. And I volunteered for multiple charitable boards. I had a very good friend who was a event planner for nonprofits exclusively, and she identified an opportunity where they could use someone who really could execute and be organized and sort of apply a layer of professionalism to a volunteer organization. So that was my first sort of full board experience, called Room to Grow, for children born into poverty in New York City. They also had a location in Boston, which was the original, and it was a fantastic experience. We did a strategic plan with McKinsey that I managed to get them to do pro bono.
Oh,
It
wow.
really elevated the organization. I was on the board for the event that they ran at a particular year, chaired at Christie's. So I got exposed to a wonderful, also mentor of mine, even if she doesn't know it, named Lydia Finette, who did a lot of charitable auctions. I was on the board of a women's domestic violence organization for women in Israel and in the Orthodox community, called Miklat. I ran the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions, which is sort of like American Idol for young opera singers. I had been involved in the opera, as I told you, by forcing myself to attend young associate events. And the patron chair at the time, Camille Labar, said to me, "Are you done having children?" She's like, "Because I've had my eye on you, but you're not having a fourth kid, right?" I'm like, no, I'm good. So she asked me to take it over, and it was a fantastic experience because I said, "Well, who else is on the committee?" She's like, "It's just you."
Oh my goodness.
So I had to recruit my team. I took it over from some wonderful women who were in their probably early 80s, keeping track of donations in a card box folder where you keep recipes. So I created a website. I was the first time they ever could take electronic tickets and pay for them before you got to the event. The most radical thing I did is try to raise money before we gave it away. They were like, "What?" I was like, it's just an idea. Let's have the money and then figure out how much to give away in prizes." But it was an amazing, amazing experience. And some of the people that I worked with at that time, I'm still in touch with today. And I basically only met them through this uh, opportunity.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So being a judge, how do you get to be a judge of sort of opera singers? Did you
You
have
have
to
to
go
be
through
in
a
the
training or
profession.
something? Yes.
You have to be in the, I didn't judge it, I just organized it.
Oh,
So we
okay.
would recruit judges. We would recruit judges from other opera houses who were
Mhm.
either musicians or conductors or former opera singers or current opera singers. We had probably 135 singers that came through the Eastern region from all over the world. So we would find the venue, recruit the judges, we set up a whole database. One of my friends who joined the committee was excellent at that, and she customized the database so that you could search. Everything before was on paper. You could search by name, you could search by soprano, tenor, what school they went to, what professor they studied with, what arias they're going to sing, and you could find whatever you wanted. And it really streamlined the whole process and really professionalized the auditions.
That sounds really amazing, and also sounds like it must have been a fun experience to be part of.
Incredible. Still very proud of them. They've taken it to another level since I've left. They were featured in Time Out New York. They added Christmas carols at people's homes. They've just done amazing things.
Do you ever get back to New York to go to the opera?
I get back to New York probably every 6 weeks because I still have clients on the East Coast. Not as much opera time as I would like. Some of my friends will send me pictures so I can live vicariously through them. I did manage to go to the LA Opera for the first time, even though I've been here for 5 years. I don't know why it seems so hard, but I finally succeeded. I'm still a fan of the Met, so LA Opera was great.
But
No
not the
shade,
Met, right?
but not the Met. I'd been going to the Met since I was, probably in college, and I'd, stand in line at 6 a.m. to get tickets and do standing room only when I was, young enough to stand for the whole opera.
There's really nothing quite like the opera experience at the Met, I think. So I don't know if it's this, I haven't been to that many operas, but the Met was really amazing. It really takes the breath away. Okay, so you did all that. You're still in New York, but now you're in LA most of the time. So what was your next move from you had your third
So I
child?
had another amazing opportunity in-house also through the volunteer aspect. So I was on the board of McClot, and the woman who was the founder of McClot and the main financial donor also had a family office. And it started with, can you just do a small project for us on the side to do XYZ, which turned into a part-time job, which turned into a full-time job for multiple years. They ultimately wound down the family office, and I was looking for consulting projects in between. I was chief of staff for Dan Tishman, also to help them transition from him being a construction mogul to having, a family office. And one of my consulting projects brought me to California, and I'd planned to go back to New York. I came with my 3 children, and they essentially kidnapped me. So when I said, "Yay, we're going back to New York," they said, "Nah, nah, nah. We love it here. Get a real job." So that led me to Pillsbury. I had used Pillsbury as an outside firm when I was a GC and had a wonderful experience with a tax partner there. He had offered me a position in New York, but I was still winding down this family office. So ultimately, I called him and said, "Remember the job offer in New York from 2 years ago? Can I accept it now in California and start over?" So he was fantastic, and I ended up taking a job at Pillsbury with the intention of only staying for 18 months until my oldest finished middle school. COVID hit, that messed everything up, and I ended up taking the California bar, and now I'm able to go back and forth and be bi-coastal.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. So I was going to ask you when you took the California bar. So you just took it during the COVID?
I took it during COVID, and I was admitted in June. Getting admitted was harder than taking the bar just because of the application where you have to fill in every job you've had in the legal profession since 18 with some precision, like April, whatever. And the Social Security office was closed during COVID, and trying to get my employment records was a nightmare. But ultimately, I prevailed and got myself admitted in June.
I mean, that's quite an accomplishment, to go back to studying for the bar exam after all those years of practice and passing and getting admitted. I don't know if I've had it in me at this point. I have my 2 bar admissions, but I did them a long time ago. Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. So you've been at Pillsbury for a short time, but this crisis litigation isn't something that we've heard about yet in terms of the resume you've just given us. So how did you get involved in crisis litigation? What is it? It seems to be a term I'm hearing more and more, but one I hadn't heard before, probably probably like the last like 18 months or so is when I first started hearing the term. So
again, with almost everything I've done, it was accidental. When I came to California, I wanted to make sure that I could quickly understand the market that I was in. I had no, other than Viacom, which was a very corporate entertainment level experience, understand the entertainment industry. I was introduced by a colleague in New York to a woman here. He called me and he said, "What do you need? Do you need clients? Do you need this?" I'm like, "I need a girlfriend." So he's like, "Oh, meet Emily." So she is a film financier. And through her, I met her business partner, who was one of the producers on Rust. They had worked with two other firms before, and I was helping them with something ancillary. And after the call, the producer texted me and said, "Hey, can we just have a quick chat?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" He's like, "Can you take over the whole Rust crisis?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So it was extremely, obviously, difficult for everyone. It's a highly emotionally charged case. For me, it's sort of honed in on all of the skill sets that I developed in terms of my business background, my legal background, being a general counsel for family office. You start to really worry and care and manage people's personalities and their sort of hot buttons, cold buttons, and protect that part of what's going on. So that's how it happened. And from the GC perspective, it was more managing. Obviously, I'm not a litigator, but managing the litigation, which I'd done in my past, managing the OSHA investigation, the corporate side. And then one thing people always forget about, sorry, I keep moving my camera, insurance recovery, because obviously insurance played a major role in this case. So it's, while being coming from a very poor, horrible incident, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my legal career. And I feel like this is exactly what I was trained to do and have experienced.
So I think, you told that story. It's kind of fascinating. It's sort of all the things that you've been doing sort of tangentially almost, or just sort of happened upon, have come together to provide you with the experience and the understanding and really the gravitas, the ability now to be able to make decisions and give the right type of counsel. And you couldn't have predicted that, I imagine, when you started out, that might be where your career ended up, right?
And I don't think it's ended up. I think I'm still on the journey. The other crisis litigation that I worked on in the last year was a colleague from law school who was on the board of a company who reached out to me just to have dinner and was just telling me a story about what's going on. And I was like, uh-oh, like you have to get counsel right away, in the sense that it was a fraud case. And as the best frauds and the best cons go, you always think it's going to be okay and they're going to pay the money back or it's all going to get resolved. But my radar went up and I said, you don't have to hire me. I'm not even a litigator, but you need to do this right away. And ultimately, I became the trusted advisor to the board and to the company and brought the right resources from Pillsbury to handle the internal investigation and deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was a cross-border case, so we had to get China counsel. It was fascinating. So these experiences have been extremely rewarding, and I'm lucky to have had those opportunities and fortunate that I had the experiences previously to be able to manage it, because these are the types of situations where there isn't an answer, where you can Google, something and say, oh, what's the law in New Jersey for, real estate ownership. So I love the things that don't have answers and trying to find a solution despite their creativity needs.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with creativity. That's what you're bringing, the creativity of thought, the being able to look different directions and see the different angles. So I think that's amazing. I think a lot of people going into law school, even young associates, don't realize how much creativity there is in the practice of law, or there can be in the practice of law. I think if you do it the right way. So fascinating. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you've done all of these things, and how do you balance it? You're now at Pillsbury, which is a fairly demanding position, I'm sure. How do you balance and still be able to do all of the charity that you have been involved in, and also you mentioned you have the 3 kids, and I know that it's a lot. I have 3 kids of my own, so I know it's a lot to try to manage.
So I don't think balance is the right word. There's no such thing. There is no balance. It's sort of being able to fold everything in at the same time. My kids have, grown up for the last 10 years with a single mom. So they've sort of learned, and I've tried to teach them how to do things that probably will serve them better. My mom did the same thing for me. I was cooking at 10, folding laundry, ironing my dad's shirts. And they also, I think it's important as a woman to show them that you could still be at the top of your game in your profession and still be a mom. There are days that things don't go exactly as planned, but you figure it out. And I think that everything I've done as a parent has also made me a better lawyer for my clients and vice versa. Things that I've learned from my clients that have helped me be a better parent. So it's all worked out. I can't say it's effortless or I'm not exhausted, but I think that overall it's very enriching. And the more I juggle personally, the more I'm capable of juggling for on behalf of my clients. So
And speaking of juggling, you've also managed to co-produce a movie, a documentary. So how did you become involved in that? What was the impetus, and tell us a little bit more about the movie if you could.
so all of these things come together, which is that when I was on the board of MICLAT, there were women's cases that didn't really fit in the buckets of the organizations that we worked with. We were sort of more of an umbrella organization, making donations to specific charities that did different aspects of the work, whether it's the social support or the women who had children that needed support. We did a project with NILAG to provide both child support, litigation issues, alimony, domestic violence, immigration. We worked with UJA for a project there. We did a project in Israel. But as the legal process, has become so complex, the divorce cases have become complex. So someone who could be divorced in New Jersey, but then their spouse flees to California. And because divorce law is based like real estate on the local jurisdiction, there's no easy way to match a judgment from here to there. And the sophistication required, especially when you add foreign countries, makes it really challenging. So for me, it was a problem that needed solving that I had experience doing. So how to domesticate a New York judgment in California and to get an Israeli court to at least try to mirror a decision that a judge had made against assets in a foreign jurisdiction. So to me, it was the perfect Tetris puzzle challenge. And I'd been doing it for probably more than 10 years. And one of my cases, the one that I'm alluding to, was a New Jersey judgment. The husband disappeared despite having lost his driver's license. I managed to hire a private detective who was Orthodox because to infiltrate the community, you have to be part of the community. Found the husband, served the husband, was ready to drag him back to court in New York. COVID hit. That was a bummer because then we participated by Zoom. While simultaneously, I had a case going in Israel against a marital estate apartment, first to gather the rents that were being collected and get them to the mother, and then ultimately to have the apartment sold so that the proceeds could go to the mother. And so I thought when I got this judgment from Israel, I was so happy. I'm like, this is the final piece. I've been working on it for 8 years. I said, we need to do something and make this a little more well known because saving the world one person at a time, while noble, will take forever. So
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to elevate it. And I had a friend who was an excellent documentarian named Laura Watsky, who had done a film called Swim Team for autistic children. She and I had that in common, that we also were devoted to special needs children in New York. She was focused in New Jersey, I was focused in New York, but we overlap both as friends and in this common interest. So I asked her, I said, do you by any chance have your next project? I don't really want to talk now. I'm studying for the bar for California, but 4 hours later, I was still on the phone. She became very excited and I raised the money. And because I had the experience over the years in these legal cases and who the right characters would be to follow and what would be an interesting angle, sort of a new spin on an old problem. The new spin was that there were young women mobilizing over Instagram over this issue, which had been it's a long-standing issue, but became more aware and had a platform that was much broader. So I thought, how interesting that something that's been around and usually just the problem of the divorcee and her, maybe immediate family, it wasn't socially recognized, and all these younger business women on Instagram who are selling their products became aware of it and rallied behind, in particular, this woman that I had been working with. So that's what started the movement, and that's what started the film. And they were doing protests around get refusal, which is a get is the Jewish divorce decree, the official piece of paper. And it's a one way, the husband has to give the Jewish divorce. So you can have a civil divorce, but if you want to live in the Jewish community, you also need a Jewish divorce. Not live, but live and be free. It's required. So there are people, of course, who've left the Jewish community over these types of issues, but it shouldn't be your choice that the only way that you can be free from your former spouse is to give up your religious identity that you've grown up with, or uproot your children who are used to that stability in a Jewish day school or wherever they go. So that's the film.
It sounds fascinating. When was it done?
So we only have the short right now because it costs a lot of money to make movies. So we have like a 20-minute sort of teaser that we've been invited to put on Time Magazine's online platform, which we hope to do soon. There's also all of those annoying things when you do something beautiful like insurance and make sure you don't get sued for defamation and hiring lawyers and getting all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted. So we're in that process now, but hope to have it up and going soon.
That sounds fantastic. I actually, we represent basically a Jewish progressive nonprofit called Zionist Movement. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they really focus on being both pro-Israel and pro-Jewish, but also progressive at the same time. And so it'd be interesting. It might be someone to put you in contact with. They might be interested in also, promoting the film. But
I love it.
I don't know.
We're still fundraising in case anyone wants to help us finish the movie.
Well, they're constantly fundraising, but yeah,
that's the challenge of nonprofit. But the other thing that was really important to me is that there's a lot of organizations, just as you pointed out, that are doing, let's say, similar things or parallel things, and they're sort of isolated on their own with their own limited resource. So my goal was to try to connect multiple organizations that were focused on the same thing, maybe in a slightly different way, different lens, and connect them so that together we could be stronger. So that experience was also part of the filmmaking, in the sense that we had an Orthodox woman running for city council in New York. We had a bunch of different Jewish organizations from New York.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
For those who are watching on the podcast, they might notice that we are dressed in different clothes. I'm in a different location. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, so we're going to finish this off on a different day, but still looking forward to concluding our conversation. Thanks again, Melina, for finding time to spend with us.
My pleasure.
So we were talking about all the wonderful things that you have accomplished and how your journey to where you are now has really, taken some twists and turns and maybe a little bit unexpected. And I was wondering if along the way, when you were making these decisions about when to pivot or where to pivot to, if you relied on specific people for career advice, or if you really just kept your own counsel, and how you went about making those decisions.
So similar to how I practice, I give myself advice in the same way, which is solicit opinions for all the people who have expert knowledge and people who actually care about what it is that you're doing. And then you throw all that into a blender and mix it up and see what shakes out. I think ultimately I have a pretty good compass in terms of what it is I want to do and what I can do. And then I just take all of the good advice that I can and make a decision based on that. Sometimes I just flip a coin.
Sometimes you have to trust your gut a little bit too, right?
Exactly.
Great. And making those decisions and making these changes, how do you think your law degree itself has worked for you, or how have you made it work for you?
So it's the backbone of everything I do. Even when clients think of me as, an advisor or they're focusing on, let's say, my MBA, really the law degree is the core of everything that I do. It may not always look that way in the traditional sense of am I sitting in a library or am I writing a brief, but really everything I do informs the law, or the law informs everything I do. And taking the California bar was actually, despite it being a very challenging experience during COVID, it was a good sort of reminder of why I do what I do and that the law is really the core of it. And even having to do it in California, which is basically like whatever you know in New York, it's the opposite, was a good experience to sort of reset the table and relaunch, my career on the West Coast.
That's very interesting that you say that it's, basically reversed. The California bar is also known to be extremely challenging. So I'm really impressed that you were able to go back and take it after all these years of not being in, student mode. It's very impressive.
It's a different part of your brain, but it's good to exercise it as well.
Exactly. And what do you value most about having your law degree? I think you touched on this a little bit, but I just think, want to expand on that a little bit more.
So one of the things I like about the law degree is the way that the law actually works. It's a real deep body of knowledge. It's not just memorization. There's precedents. There's, legislature. There's the way it evolves over time and tries to match, things that didn't exist when the law was written, like NFTs. So I find it to be intellectually very stimulating. And I also find it very comforting that there are rules that you can lean into to find your path. And then I also like that there's still room for creativity, which is that there's not one answer to one problem. So I find it very satisfying. I know people always say things like, "Oh, you're a lawyer. Do you hate it?" And I actually love what I do.
I'm glad to hear that, because I finally find another person to say the same thing. I mean, I love being a lawyer, and I'm always shocked when people are very against, what it is they've been spending their lifetime doing or preparing for. So that's great. Okay, I have three final questions for you, Melina. These are my rapid fire questions usually, so we'll see how rapid they go today. Number one, if you couldn't be an attorney or didn't go to law school, what career would you have chosen?
An actress. I always joke that there are certain people in the law that have shadow careers. They wanted to be a baseball player, so they work for, as a GC of a team. So I think that, a VJ or an actress would have been my shadow career when you're thinking of being in-house at Viacom.
That's a great one. Number two, what is the one thing you wish you knew when you graduated law school that you know now?
To not follow such a straight path, that life is what life is, and every experience that you have enriches who you are as a person and who you are as a practitioner.
And number three, and final question, would you recommend a law career to a woman considering law school today?
Absolutely. I think that no matter what you want to do in life, that again, the law is sort of a backbone. It informs business decisions, it informs personal decisions, and you sort of can't go wrong. Whether you end up practicing at a big firm or going in-house or starting your own business and being an entrepreneur, it gives you the gravitas and the skeleton information that you need to navigate the world.
Couldn't agree more. Melina, thank you so much for joining us and rejoining us today. This has been a big pleasure getting to know you, and I hope we can continue the conversation.
Thank you, Rosanne. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Success in Brief with your host, Rosanne Felicello. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others. You can catch prior episodes at www.felicellolaw.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.